Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Inside National Security by the National Security Academy. I'm Cassian Peña, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Eric O'Neill. Hello, Eric.
Hey, Cassian, it's good to be here.
So, Eric, he is a very special person. He's well known for being one of the most important spy hunters of all time, catching the first cyber criminal or cyber spy. And today I'd like for him to speak about that. He released a new book October 7th. So that certainly is something which I think will interest many of our audience. And Eric, so could you just tell the audience who you are, what you're about, and a bit about your history to begin with?
Sure. Well, I'm Eric O'Neill. My beginning of my career was in the FBI. I was a counterintelligence and counterterrorism undercover operative. My
Mhm.
job was to catch spies, which is the science of counterintelligence, and terrorists, counterterrorism. And mostly what I did was I worked undercover. I very rarely ever spoke to a target until my final investigation in the FBI, final because I left shortly afterwards, which was to go undercover in the most unique case the FBI had ever run in FBI headquarters to catch and supervisory special agent who turned out to be the most damaging spy in US history, named Robert Hanssen. For 22 years of his 25-year career, he had spied against the United States for the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation. That's how long he spied. He survived that collapse. And I was sent undercover in a brand new office that the FBI built, essentially to catch him, called the Information Assurance Section. And this was really the FBI's first approach at cybersecurity. And they put the biggest spy in US history in charge of it, mostly because Hanssen was able to steal information for the 22 years of his 25-year career in the FBI that he was a spy
Mhm.
by penetrating computer systems in the FBI that were never built to defend. At the end of the investigation, which took me about 3 months to catch him, I did catch him, which is the story of my first book, Gray Day. And since then, I've been a national security attorney. I run a company that does competitive intelligence called the Georgetown Group. I have a new company that does cybersecurity advisory services called NexusSure. And I'm also a very prolific keynote speaker. I speak all over the world about cybersecurity, inspirational keynotes, surviving Hollywood, and other things. And I'm also an author of my next book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime.
I think that's the best introduction we had thus far. Thank you, Eric. And like you mentioned, his new book, Spy Lies and Cybercrime, is very important nowadays. I know that many young people that want to get into the field of national security that we work with and so forth, they're very much more engaged with tech. And of course, like you mentioned, that counterintelligence point of it. And there, oftentimes, of course, cybersecurity is of most importance and critical infrastructure, etc. And I heard from what I saw about your book is that it is accessible to all, right? Like you don't really have to be
Right.
within the field of national security, correct?
I wrote the book for everyone from chief information security officer, who will get quite a deal of information out of it. But it was very important to me to ensure that I could write it for the typical consumer. So, as you said, Cassian, someone who is getting into national security, is in national security, is interested in it, or just loves true crime, is going to love this book and learn a lot from it. In order to write it, I went back to my origins in the FBI at the FBI Academy,
Hmm.
thought long and hard about how I was taught counterintelligence, and use all those teachings and tactics in the book. And of course, because it reveals a lot about how the FBI does their ways and means, how the FBI teaches counterintelligence. The first people to read the book were the FBI. They had to clear everything that I put in that book.
Hmm.
And I was somewhat shocked at the number of secrets that they allowed me to divulge. So when you read this book, you will become a true FBI undercover operative counterintelligence insider. And that is that cool factor that I really wanted. The book is also widely useful to any kind of consumer. So if you're buying things online, if you're going on the internet, if you're getting an email or a text or a DM, if you're wading into social media, then you're under threat from cyber criminals. And this book is your battle plan to defend yourself against them.
I think that's what people like to hear. I think it interests many people, this whole field, and etc. So I would like to start with the beginning. I don't know if you received this question in the past, but I saw that you studied for your bachelor psychology, right?
Yes.
And many people, of course, study political science, but honestly, the good thing about the national security field is it's quite varied. So why did you pick psychology? And I think it might have impacted your future work.
Yes, certainly. So I had a dual major in psychology and political science with minors in criminology and sociology. I picked psychology because I was fascinated by it. And I had taken a class in high school that was one of my favorite classes. It was taught by a great professor in high school. And so when I went to Auburn University for undergrad, I actually went to study aerospace engineering and only lasted a year. I just didn't love it. And I've always said, you've got to do the things you love, otherwise, it'll always be work. So I really disappointed my parents and left aerospace engineering, one of the most prestigious engineering schools in the country, to the College of Liberal Arts and studied psychology and political science. And the psychology helped me a lot when I was in the FBI because much of what I had to do was profile and predict the tactics of my adversaries. Psychology helps there, also learning all their techniques and tactics so that you can spot them. How I explain the science in the book is I also teach self-defense and martial arts. So when a punch is coming towards you, you have to know the techniques of your opponent so you can see the punch before it hits you in the face. So the idea of counterintelligence is identifying all of the tactics of your adversary so you can see that punch coming towards your face and then having the skills and your own tactics to block it. And so that's why the book is in two parts, but that was also how my training was. And that psychology helps a little bit because it was able to help me predict my targets. It certainly helped me against Robert Hanssen because he was a textbook narcissist. So I knew from my background how to handle a narcissist.
So you mentioned the analogy or example of like boxing or martial arts. So in that case, especially as you're dealing with, like you mentioned, one of the most important spies of that time, he must have been like one of the pro boxers. So it would have been like a Muhammad Ali or uh, I don't know, maybe Mike Tyson of
Yeah,
some
it
sorts, right?
felt a lot like me being me going up against Mike Tyson. He was a spy known only by the code name Gray Suit, which was the legendary spy that not just the FBI, every member of the intelligence community had been hunting for 2 decades and had no idea where he was. We only knew as an intelligence community that, and when I say that, I'm talking about the FBI, CIA, NSA, military intelligence, everyone. We only knew that there was a mole, a very high placed mole somewhere in the IC, but no idea where.
Mhm.
He was adept enough at making sure that he hid his espionage so that even the Russians didn't know that he was in the FBI. In fact, they thought he was in the CIA, and so did the FBI.
Wow. So how do you crack someone who are literally that's exactly their main job to be a spy, to be within the world of intelligence? How do you crack this person? Because you would think that they would have the rule book, that they would be educated within the field, that
Right.
they know it. So how do you crack exactly that person?
Well, Cassian, it gets a little worse. Hansen wasn't just that damaging spy. At one point, the FBI went to their top Soviet analyst and asked that individual to put together a list of anyone who could be the spy gray suit. And that top analyst was Hansen. So the FBI went to him and asked him to catch himself, which puts you in the perfect place. I draw the analogy of being a bank manager and stealing from your own bank. So you know all the security protocols, you know where the cameras are, you know the codes to get into the vault. You're able to do all that quietly without anyone knowing. Catching Hansen was a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck. And that's usually how law enforcement works. You get a little lucky at the end, and that's how you get on the trail of your target. Here, the FBI, a joint task force between the FBI and the CIA, had let it be known, right, out on the street that they were looking for the spy, and they hooked a fish. A former KGB intelligence officer had saved a file of information and contacted them clandestinely. They all met over in Russia, and then he sold this slim file of information for millions of dollars and extradition to the United States and witness protection so that Putin wouldn't find him. And that little folder of information pointed to Robert Hanssen. and hearts fell in the little group of FBI agents who received it because he was one of the top tier people conducting investigations to catch the spy that turned out to be him.
So now I'll be asking two back-to-back questions, which I think will link to one another. The first one is many people, of course, consider the field, or at least the FBI or the other intelligence agencies and so forth. They each are very different with their corporate cultures and so on. How did you personally get into the FBI? And then I would like to hear the story, and I'd like that you tell the audience about the one time when you basically took the recording from his bag, and you
Right,
didn't
his
know
Palm Pilot. Yes,
exactly. Yes, that was
certainly. Well, I going back to Auburn University, I had left engineering, got a degree in psychology and political science. Didn't go to the Naval Academy, which was actually the goal, was to study engineering for a year and then transfer to the U.S. Naval Academy. Felt bad about that. Always wanted to serve my country, and with a degree in liberal arts, didn't have a lot of options other than in the 90s go back to DC and became a consultant. And I was doing damage assessments, litigation based consulting, which was not fun in your early 20s. And I applied. I applied to the FBI and the NSA and the CIA and the DEA and the Secret Service and everyone, thinking that this was another way I could serve my country, learn skills that I was never going to find anywhere else, and do something that was going to be both rewarding and exciting. And I think that's really important when you're young. When you're older, you can kind of sit back and relax and move away from cities and get out to the country. But when you're young, you want to be in the thick of it. And it was between the FBI and the DEA at the end of the day. And it one day decided that I'd join the FBI over the DEA. It's just the recruiter called me one day before the other one. And otherwise, I probably wouldn't be talking to you now. I would have disappeared into South America somewhere, and who knows where it would be now. So I chose the FBI, and that led to the undercover work in the Robert Hanssen case. And the story that you asked about was how I caught him, and a lot of that was learning. And this story is detailed almost exactly the way, actually exactly the way that it happened in real life in my first book, Gray Day, from my first person perspective. So if you want to hear the full complete story, you can either read it there or listen to the audiobook. If you want to see Ryan Phillippe pretend he's me and reenact it on stage, he plays me in the movie Breach, which was 2007 Universal, and that is the pivotal scene in the movie. But right from me, I was tasked to find a smoking gun, which is impossible. In national security cases, you never find a smoking gun. In legal cases, you don't. In law enforcement, it's very, very rare. It's like stumbling on a unicorn when you're walking in the forest. And but sometimes these cases at this level, this is what the tasking is. So it was a massive amount of stress and pressure. And so I was looking for where he might have information that could lead us to his eventual arrest. We needed evidence that was going to make this case a slam dunk so we could put the death penalty on top of him and get him to tell us everything he did. We needed that pressure so we could fix it, because the FBI was broken. He had broken it over 2 decades of revealing all its secrets. And he had a Palm Pilot. And for those of you who aren't Gen X or older, a Palm Pilot was the first personal data assistant. And it was a big, thick device, and you flipped it open, you took a plastic stick and you stabbed it a lot, and that's how you got the data in. And he loved the thing. And he talked about it all the time. And he told me that if you ever want to be an executive, you need to have one of these things. And so I got one. I went to the Office of Science and Technology and requisitioned 2 Palm 5s. He had a 3X, and handed over a Palm 5 to him. And he said, I don't want this one. I'll keep mine. I wrote the encryption myself. Now, that's a pretty big clue, because you encrypt things that you want to protect. If you're encrypting your own Palm Pilot, right, then clearly you have information on there you don't want someone to see. And so I had to get it away from him. The problem was it was always in his left back pocket, and he only took it out of his pocket when he sat down at his desk, and he would put it in his bag, same pocket every single time. So we tricked him. We had a section chief and a assistant director come in unannounced that were read into the case, challenged him to go down the shooting room to the shooting range in the sub basement and shoot. And while he was down there, I stole the Palm Pilot out of his bag, rushed down 3 flights of steps, got it down from the 9th floor to the 6th floor, and got a tech team to copy it. And I got it back in his bag seconds before he arrived in the room. I had just made it back to my desk. It was such a narrow amount of time, and I put the best poker face I've ever had. He had gone down to the shooting range and emptied a clip into a target, brought it back, looked at it, and then just abruptly leaves. I'm probably realizing I don't have my Palm Pilot, and do I trust Eric? And he comes out of his office, glares at me, and he asked me if I was in his office. Now, one of the precepts of planning, right, of good cybersecurity, of good security, is always plan, and I had planned. And so I had put a memo in his inbox that I'd written about whatever. And I told him, yeah, I was in your office. I put a memo in your inbox. We used to do that, right? We used to actually write memoranda and print it, and then you would have to sign it because it came from you, and you would put it in a hard inbox, and then now it's all email, right? But I had done that, and he just holds that look and finally says, I never want you in my office, and leaves for the day. And we arrested him less than a week later because that Palm Pilot is digital calendar. So we knew not only where he would be when he made his final drop to the Russians, but when. And we were very fortunate that I was able to find that, because otherwise there's a chance he would have made that final drop to the Russians, retired, got his $50,000, and got away.
You mentioned one thing, which is that he encrypted his own Palm Pilot. Now, I'm not aware. It's my first time, like you mentioned, hearing what it is. Mm, Now, it seems like this would be a complicated endeavor to encrypt a Palm Pilot, but correct me if I'm wrong. And so he goes and does this. That already shows that he is very advanced in the field of encryption and tech. He's good with technology and so forth,
Yes,
right?
he
So
was
did
definitely
that?
a hacker.
Oh, he was okay. So
Yes.
did that make the whole catching more complicated, or how did that play?
Well, one of the reasons I was placed in the case is it takes a hacker to catch a hacker. And while he was, it turns out, a black hat hacker, I was one of those kids in the 80s who was a white hat hacker. I was just really interested in seeing how I could break security, not to do anything wrong, but just to understand security better. And that's today now one of the precepts of cybersecurity. You need to have teams who come in and try to break your security and find ways to get in and find holes and paths, so that you can patch and correct and shore up those defenses. Because if your friendly white hat hacker can get in a red team test of your security, then that means a cyber criminal will find a way in. So we routinely do that when we do vulnerability assessments. We try to hack our clients and find out if we can find the pathways that a cyber criminal would take in the future.
I think that's a great USP. We're going to hack you as our client.
Yeah, really. Well, we call it red team testing or vulnerability
Right,
scanning
right,
or those sorts of things, right?
right.
But it's essentially what cyber criminals will do. Cyber criminals will use basic. There are versions of AI, like the most famous is what ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or some of the others. But there are versions on the dark web that have no guardrails, that are full LLMs that will do whatever the cyber criminal wants. And you or I, for almost no money, could fire up a Tor browser and use one of those LLMs to write a very simple script that will scan the network of whoever you want to attack and continually scan it until it finds a vulnerability. And when it finds the vulnerability, the AI will even exploit the vulnerability and then hand you a username and passcode that you can use to get in to whoever you want to hack. I mean, it's made it so easy. You don't even, so that, in order to do that, you don't even have to learn any coding.
Right.
The AI does it for you. So those sort of vulnerability scannings that the bad guys are doing are the same things that we do in cybersecurity in order to find those holes and make sure that the bad guys can't get you that way.
hmm And your switch to the private sector, I think, is quite interesting, of course. I know that you were an attorney for some time, you were a lawyer, and then now you have your own firm and
Mhm.
you do exactly what you mentioned, right? which I think is very, very interesting. How is that switch? How is it dealing with all of a sudden institutional clients or clients which truly need to get protected and you're helping them with this mission? It's a bit different, I guess, but at the same time,
Certainly.
very similar. So how
Well,
is
I'm
that?
still a lawyer.
Yes.
I'm of counsel to a small boutique legal group called Impressa, and it's a great team of lawyers, and we basically do the legal work we want to do, as opposed to having billable hours in a big firm. I was at one of the biggest firms in the world, DLA Piper, for 5 years, and that was a phenomenal experience to learn the corporate environment, to learn how to think as an executive. But 5 years was enough for me, and I had an offer to become a general counsel, and I did for a charity. That was my biggest pro bono client. I did that for a series of years. At the same time, I started my first company, which was the Georgetown Group. And part of the reason I did that is because I missed the investigative work that I did in the FBI. And so I created a company that does that. And we do everything from the asymmetrical research that you would do in a major transaction like a merger or an acquisition or a stock purchase or a large partnership. Lawyers look at certain things, and I understood that. Accountants look at certain things, but you're missing a huge amount of information that could be hidden by one party or another, or no one thought of. And that's what we do. We find all the skeletons in everybody's client closet, so we can assist our clients in either saying we need to walk away from this deal because they hid something that they didn't want us to know, but it's very damaging, like a bankruptcy or a huge gambling debt by the CEO. Or they can use that to say, hey, we've got this problem, so we're going to reduce the price by a lot, and here's why, right? And the other thing is competitive intelligence, giving your client an advantage over someone else in a deal, or someone who's a competitor, or ensuring that the people you hire are trustworthy and honest. And then cybersecurity feeds right into that. And so it was, as someone who became one of the top speakers in cybersecurity and cybercrime, it seemed to me that I had to start my own company, and I did with a number of colleagues from my days as national security strategist for cybersecurity companies.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you told the story of Hansen, etc., how you caught him and so forth, you mentioned, I think, sometimes an overlooked issue, which is the fact that he used to be he worked with the Soviet Union, but then after with Russia as we know it today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that switch, I think, is quite interesting. Well, the fact that he was able to continue at better because many of the main agents at that time
Mm-hmm.
they were laid off during that switching
That's
period.
right. The KGB was
Yeah.
disbanded. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the KGB, their premier spy agency, was disbanded and reformed into two agencies: the SVR, which is like our CIA, and the FSB, which is their state police. And a lot of those KGB intelligence officers were out of a job, and they weren't going to go quietly. They did what they were trained to do. They stole secrets, and most of them sold them pretty quickly to the West and made a ton of money. And we were catching all those Cold War spies. In fact, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Hanssen went dark. He went inactive, and assumed he was going to be caught because everybody else was being caught. But he was so clever in never letting the Russians know who he was. And the only guy who had the file information that he stole, Hanssen got a little lucky because he decided not to sell it. He kept it for a rainy day. He kept it until he decided to retire, and he wanted to retire somewhere warm in the US. And he was then finally pulled that, decades old file of information and sold it to the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, Hanssen got very lucky. And once he felt like no one's after me, no one's kicked down my door, I'm not in handcuffs, he decided to reactivate himself, and he made his new approach to the SVR. So in his career, Hanssen spied for the GRU, military intelligence, the KGB, right, the first Soviet intelligence, and then the SVR, the new intelligence agency formed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he had the trifecta. Yeah, certainly, and I agree with Dexter. Being Dexter Ingram is a friend of mine from the Spy Museum and other places. It's true. I've always believed in a life of service. I think you have to give back. If you are successful, then I think you have even more of a duty to give back. And that's why, I've always worked with charities and worked with, I spent over a decade as the general counsel for a global charity, and I still do. Um, Narcissists are it can be very complicated because of the way that they think about themselves. What I was able to do with Hanssen is I learned that what he had never really had in the FBI, because he was a terrible manager and the FBI quickly moved him away from any management positions, is he had never had someone to mentor. Mm. And I could see that he really wanted that. Like, that was important to him. And so I fulfilled that role. Now, he was really abusive, but I couldn't go run to HR because I'm trying to catch him, right? So I just sucked it up, dealt with it, absorbed the abuse, and continued to fill that role he needed, which was someone that he could mold and shape and teach. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the more I called him on the outrageous things he would say, the more he would push and try to impress me. And I started learning information, critical intelligence, just by becoming a human recording machine, challenging them and then recording it all. And I didn't know it was important, but the analyst I was handing over all the information to did. And he started revealing information he knew about cases that he shouldn't have known because it was classified, and he had no way of knowing that that case even existed or hadn't worked the case. And those were our earliest wins to know that, yes, this was the spy we're after. The first thing I'd do is make sure and identify that this is Gray Suit, that this isn't just another derivative bad guy, that this is actually Gray Suit that we're after.
So now this will be the last question, which will be about skills, right?
Right.
You mentioned, like we talked about cybersecurity and so forth. Now many people, of course, they believe in a apocalypse of some sort where now AI will make it so nobody will have a job anymore, right? And that there's no need to learn anything because AI can do it for you. I want to know your response against that. And then as well, what skills would you recommend that young people just starting off in their career or even in university to actually learn and to make them become not only better people, but also improve professionally?
Right. Well, AI is not going to take away all the jobs. It's actually going to eventually create more jobs because there will be a full necessary infrastructure just to maintain what we need to have the AI of the future that we want and the quantum computers of the future that we want. It's going to open up new jobs, and a lot of that is going to be in tech and STEM. So if we think about AI, I see a resurgence in nuclear power. There are going to be more nuclear power plants. We just can't, our current energy grid cannot power the amount of energy needed by the AI we have. Nonetheless, the AI into the future, right? So there, you can think of an entire supply chains behind that. There are going to be parts manufacturers. There are going to be laborers. There are going to be equipment. Robotics of the future might be able to do some of this, but not a lot of the work right now that needs to be done. AI is going to open up new doors and avenues for work that we can't even dream of right now. As we move forward into a very hyper-connected future. So I see a lot of the work of the future is going to be in STEM. That doesn't mean you need a computer science degree, but it would behoove someone who wants to ensure that they have a future to get something like an engineering degree, because it helps you think the way that you'll need to in order to design, to understand, even if it's systems engineering. I think there will be a lot more work for creatives because AI desperately needs creativity. It doesn't create. And I know that sounds counterintuitive to your question, and I spent a bunch of time on my book on this. AI doesn't create anything. It regurgitates and repackages.
Right.
So, it can make a picture, but the picture is going to be derivative of a dozen other pictures that a human created, because all it can do is look at what it can find in a database of information, images that it has access to. And then it's just trying to predict what you want from it. Right. So, if you're asking for, a picture of a duck in a sailor suit standing, on the side of, and that looks a little angry, it will go find a bunch of images of Donald Duck, right? And it might give you something that looks sort of close to it, but it's not going to come up with something itself.
Mhm.
So I think that there will always be a space for people who are creative in writing, in art, and literature. Um, I think AI, if used correctly, helps us. And if it's abused, it will harm us, like every single technology we've ever invented and adopted wholesale.
Mhm.
I do spend a good number of chapters on AI exploitation, especially on our youth and our teens and our children. We give our kids access to technology, cell phones, social media far too early, and that causes net damage to them. I say in the book, in our family, we don't give our kids a phone until they're 14,
Yeah.
period. And we don't give them access to social media until they can understand it, because social media is now rife with AI. There was just a few days ago a plane crash, right? And when that plane went down, there were countless images and videos of people crying because they lost loved ones on the plane, like famous people, right? Sports athletes and politicians, and it was all AI deepfake just to get people to click. And so one thing that I've said, and now we're getting the dangers of AI, is that by next year, 90% of what we see on the internet is going to be synthetic, which means built by AI.
Mhm.
And that could be a dangerous world, because if you can't believe your own eyes, then what are you going to believe?
Right.
And when there's a world where there is so much fake, it's very easy, even when you see a fact you don't want to believe, to just say it's fake. So everything we see online, we're just going to either believe if we want to, or disbelieve if we don't want to, right? And then where do you find truth in that? And I think that's a big problem. So, in a nutshell, there will be jobs. They're not going to all go away. There'll be different jobs. Um, and AI can help us, but it also can really hurt us.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. This brings back to the point that being authentic and truthful is, I think, the most valuable asset we can have, right? So,
Certainly.
yeah, thank you very much for your time. We will link all of your resources, your books, and so forth, and where people can find you. And I appreciate it very much, and I think it will help many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassian.